All right, guys, this is Dan from YWIL, and I'm sitting here with Daniel Kraus, author of the new novel, The Living Dead, which he finished the final work of the great George A. Romero. Daniel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Always ready to talk Romero to any fellow fan.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm the number one of like my friends that want to talk about it, and of my friends, there's maybe like two or three that can really dive into it. So getting to talk to you, who you got to really dive into the mind of Romero right in this book, is a real treat for me. So first off, I want to say I love the book.
Thank you.
I got it the day it came out. I flew through almost 700 pages in less than 5 days. I was completely hooked. My fiance was like, "You're not talking to me," and I said, "I know." I'm enjoying this too much.
That's great. Thanks.
So I got it here with me. What was it like for you as a fan, kind of diving into the mind of George Romero?
Well, it was it was certainly surreal. Romero was really the first artist that I became aware of as a human being. You know, I think I certainly probably saw cartoons and Disney movies and stuff when I was very young, but I never connected them with a person as a creator, really. But when I was very, very young, 5 or 6 years old, is when I first saw Night of the Living Dead. And then because, of course, it was public domain, it constantly was on TV, and I saw it a million times. And he became really the first artist that I liked and was attentive to. I think it's a big intellectual step, I think, for a kid to see a work, whether it's a movie or a book or whatever, and kind of be able to look through it and see that there's another person on the other side. And so I was able to do that with Night of the Living Dead. His movies, for a while it was just Night, but eventually as I got older, I saw other ones. His movies really changed who I was dramatically, I think. And eventually,
when I read the end of the book, the note from the co-author, so much of your story was very similar to me. I saw Night of the Living Dead when I was maybe 6, 7 years old. My dad let me watch it when my mom was out one night. It's like, don't tell your mother. And it became an obsession. I went to the video store with my dad the next day. We rented Dawn and Day the week after. I just kind of dove into it. So reading this book, it definitely bled through that this was written by someone that was very delicate with the source material, if you will.
Yeah.
And the heart that George Romero put into all his work. So I believe you said that you got this book, got a chance to finish this back in 2018. That had to be a little surreal when it was like offered to you.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. It basically came out of the blue. About a month after he died, and George died in the summer of 2017.
Yes.
I got a call from his estate, which is a fancy way of saying his wife and his manager. And as soon as I heard the word novel on the phone, my brain started working, because I realized that I was aware he had been working on a novel for the past 10 years leading up to his death. He would occasionally mention it in interviews. Yeah. There was never a whole lot of information on it, but he was kind of working on this book.
He'd leave Easter eggs for the fans.
Yeah, so I knew immediately what they were talking about. And yeah, it's to this moment, it's hard for me to understand. I think I went to work so fast and so hard on this behemoth that I've never had much time to really sit and consider the cosmic weirdness of it all, that something that started when I was 5 now gets completed.
Yeah, it's like literally the thing that brought you into the world that you are now, and now you're a part of it, and with the guy that created it. I actually just noticed the poster behind you too of the amusement park, which I'm very excited for when that's going to be available. You actually got to see it too, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's great. Wait, it's going to blow your mind.
I cannot wait. So I'm trying to think about the process of writing this book, because you took really good care of the characters. It seemed like you had a real passion for each one specifically. The one that I thought was maybe the most interesting was Etta. Specifically a character who is autistic, and you handled that with great care, especially a subject that in today's world is very sensitive. Was that one of the most complex characters for you to write in the book?
Oddly, no. It was one of the easiest.
Really?
And I can't say why. And she is among my favorite characters. I really, when people ask me what my favorite parts of the book are, I don't really know the answer to that, but I sometimes default to the Etta Hoffman sections. For some reason, and it may be because she and I are both hermits in our own ways, and I really like being alone.
Yeah.
That I came natural, and her voice came natural to me. Like I just feel like, you know, maybe people's, you know, her brain is maybe different than my brain in some ways, but you know, at the end of the day, we're all human, and I feel like I understand, even though I'm not on this spectrum. I don't think I understand some of the elements of how she probably felt. You know,
it's a bit relatable, and
yeah,
I kind of
like,
feel the same way.
there's a
We
part where
operate
she's
best when we're left to our own devices.
totally. That's one of the great things about being a writer for me, is that I can basically be alone. You know, there's a moment in the book where Etta likes one of her coworkers because the coworker doesn't ever say hi to her in the hall.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's me. Like, don't make me make small talk. Don't make me.
It's funny you
yeah.
say that. I was I took a walk with my fiance the other day, and I was talking about how everyone we walk by has to wave and everything, and I'm like, I just wish you'd leave me alone. Just like, you know, you can look at me, but I don't need to make small talk with people. And maybe that's why I related to Etta so much too.
Yeah, she has no room in her brain for niceties. You know,
Yeah.
it just please and thank you are just things that are getting in the way of life to her.
Yeah. And there was another character in there, Richard Lindoff, who you know, is ultimately, he's basically the equivalent of Captain Rhodes in Day of the Dead on a different scale when you think about the human element of it. Now, I got to ask, it seemed kind of obvious to me, and I could be wrong, who that character is based on. There is some parallels there to someone that is in a major leadership position in this country.
Yeah.
Am I off base?
No, you're not off base. You know, it was pretty well known that the Kaufman character in Land of the Dead was based on George W. Bush.
Yep.
So it shouldn't surprise anyone that the big bad guy in Living Dead would also have some pretty firm connections to you know, real leaders. I mean, a hallmark of Romero is don't trust your institutions, don't trust your leaders.
For sure. And I appreciated that. And obviously, one of the big things that, you know, people that don't follow Romero like you and I do is that they miss a lot of times the little social cues and the social commentary in Night, Dawn, Day, Land, Diary, Survival. And you did a great job with that in this book, down to social media, to differences between people. I noticed so many different little nods to the previous stuff. There was the obvious one, like Ghoul from Night of the Living Dead. And the one I really appreciated was in I believe the second to last chapter of the book, when you talked about specifically the Coopers in the moldy basement, Roger wondering if his death meant anything, and Sarah, John, and Bill on an island. That to me, like, you know, that was like a perfect fan service for me.
Yeah, I mean, it was important for me to. I wanted to. I mean, clearly George meant this to be his final word, I think. And sort of conversation stopper on the conversation that he began 50 years ago. And though it also seemed that he didn't want to involve any of his past characters in any kind of important way, and you know, probably didn't have the legal right to in most ways.
Yep.
It felt important to me to send off George in a big way that acknowledged him as a person. There are things in the book that are very biographical to George and his relationship with his wife. And I wanted to, you know, sort of make nods at his larger career beyond his zombie films, and just the fact that he was an important storyteller.
Yeah.
So yeah, just sort of a glancing nod at those other dead characters. It wasn't
heavy-handed. It was kind of just like, you know, like, we know you're there.
I wanted to do it in a way that just felt kind of, if anything, a little bit poetic and a little wistful.
That's the best way to put it specifically. Now, there were some things you did in the book that I was actually really pleasantly surprised with, things that George never really got to do in the movies. The first obvious one being the animals, dogs and rats and things like that. Now, obviously, things like zombie animals have been explored before. We've seen it in Return of the Living Dead did it with in the warehouse in the beginning. Resident Evil obviously did it. But George, even though it's on one of the commentaries on the DVD of the movie, never got to go there. Now, was that something that he wanted to go specifically within this novel, or was that your own creation?
It's my own creation, but it's my interpretation of where he was headed. You know, his last few years of his life, he made repeated references to zombie animals. It was in the deleted scene from Land of the Dead. It was in the commentary tracks. It was in various interviews where he kept kind of coyly referring to zombie animals and how he was interested in them and was planning to sort of look into that in a very teasing way that made me want to pursue it. It wasn't something like I picked up the manuscript and I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to screw it all up. I'm going to come up with zombie animals. No inherent interest in zombie animals. It was honestly my interpretation of where he was going next. So, you know, the author, one of the great things about the author's note is it lays out my thought process. So anyone who reads the book and wants to see how I just make stuff up? No, you can read about my thought process and how this is ultimately my interpretation of where George was going with some of the threads. Some of the threads were very clear. He wrote some of them. He planned out some of them. But there was a lot of space where I had to fill in blanks. And I feel pretty good about this one. Like I feel like it's a sensible interpretation of clues he had left, and it opened a ton of doors. Like there's very little to do with zombie animals in this book.
No,
they're sort of references. They exist. They're
mentioned in passing, more or less.
Yeah, so they're not
knowledge that they're there, which I thought was important because, as you said, it's somewhere George wanted to go, but he didn't ever necessarily have the means to do so.
Right.
And the other thing you did.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
No, I mean I was just going to say, so I didn't want to, have the third act of the book just be zombie animal mayhem. It was really just a way of opening a door to a guiding philosophy for the rest of the book.
And one of the other interesting directions you took here was, for the first time, from the zombies' point of view, what it was like when they crossed over, the you. Yeah. I found that fascinating. The only other time I can remember that really being explored in the book, maybe you've read it, by Brian Keene, The Rising and the City of the Dead, which for me are two of the best zombie novels I've read. And he went that route as well, but a little different approach to it. I thought that was fascinating and a great way to go about it.
I actually haven't read those books.
I strongly recommend them.
But I know Brian, and I like his. I read a few of his books and really enjoyed them. And I have The Rising. At some point in the past few years, I bought it. But then, once I got involved with this book, I was like, all right, no more zombie anything. I want to stay
in one lane,
stay as pure as I can to just Romero zombies. But now that you mentioned that, and now that the book is done, I really need to read that.
You gotta have City of the Dead ready to go right after, because I read them, I finished The Rising, and immediately had to pick up City of the Dead because it's one you're gonna want to pull right into. But again, awesome. With what was it like going into that idea of the zombies mindset itself when they crossed over? You started with the two people on the Navy vessel, and they kill themselves, and then you get to see them cross over. How did you come to that?
Well, that's a really good example of how George and how our ideas sort of meshed. I don't know that it would have occurred to me to do that on my own, but he had written the chapters from the zombie point of view at exactly in the point in the book where they show up on the aircraft carrier. What I did, let me pause. So they were fascinating because it was the first time you got to hear from George Romero what it's like to look out of a zombie's eyes. And another thing we were able to do is we dug up this long forgotten short story of his that he had published on his website, his short-lived website around the year 2000. And this was also a story that took place from the zombies' point of view. So suddenly I had access to all this interesting information about how a zombie perceives things through not just sight, but sound and smell and touch. So what I did, though, in those chapters was I changed the perspective of them. I'm the one who came up with the you. So I combined what George wanted to do and what he had already sort of informed me about zombies. and I connected them to this other idea that connected to the broader arc of the zombie lifespan and end evolution, as I understood it from the films and writings and interviews and clues that Romero left behind.
Yeah, and I really appreciate it. And forgive me, I'm forgetting the character's name. The one that is in the last chapter of the book that's going to the tar pits.
Annie Tower. Yeah.
Yeah, Annie Tower. I really appreciated that because it was the closest I felt connected to a zombie in one of these stories since Bub.
Yeah.
And the other things you approached that George had started in Dawn of the Dead with the memory of going to the shopping mall and Bub remembering what he did, and then you see it in Land with Big Daddy pumping gas. But that was the deepest it had been explored, how she almost became this urban legend zombie through the years with the prosthetic legs and the blades for arms. That I thought was like poignant, and it seemed to me the ultimate props I can give you here is that reading this, it was like I was reading Romero word for word. He encompassed you when you were writing, and that's not to take anything away from you or anything like that. But it was wonderful to read. To get into my favorite director, period, not just horror, to almost be in his mind again was just fascinating.
Well, look, I mean, I feel like as much pressure as I put in myself for all of it, I did feel like in a way like this is what I've been training for my whole life. He was my favorite director too, and beyond that, he was my favorite artist in books, film, music, you name it. So I had been really studying his films like an academic most of my adult life. So this was me, the minor league player, getting called up to the majors. It was my time to put to use everything that I'd used.
And that's really saying something, considering you've worked with Guillermo del Toro. You did Troll Hunters, and you did the film or the book novelization of the Academy Award-winning Shape of Water. So that, I mean, going from that Del Toro to Romero, as a fan, I'd have a hard time not fanboying a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, Guillermo and I did 2 books together, and that was awesome. But I didn't grow up on Guillermo's movies.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't the building blocks of what you are.
Exactly. So this was at a different scale of, this wasn't just an artist. This was kind of a father figure.
Yeah. And, it's funny when I saw today on Twitter that Del Toro just inked a deal with Netflix. And while I was reading this book, and I actually tweeted it to you today, all I could think is, would you like to see this adapted into some type of series or a movie? And would he be the guy to do it?
I think, I think something like that is probably going to happen.
Oh, man.
As far as who would do it, I mean, the opportunities are endless here. Guillermo definitely has a distinct point of view. And I think, that's probably what you want. You're passing it off to a different artist. There's no way around that.
Yeah.
So George, in his own way, although he wasn't known as really a stylist, like a visual stylist, he was more of an idea man. I would have no problem at all, obviously, handing it off to somebody who was a stylist. I think it's, you have to, it's a different medium, you have to trust somebody else to bring their strengths to it. So yeah, I'm open to anyone.
And if they do it, you got to make one request though, or 2 requests, we'll say. First, Tom Savini has to do the makeup. Second off, don't turn them into running zombies.
I will do my damnedest to make sure they don't do that.
I think that's probably George's biggest no-no. I've heard stories about him wearing the shirts "Running Zombies Suck." I think we actually had Brian Keene on the show about a year ago and talked to him, and he talked about when he met George, and George was wearing the shirt, and George loved it, and he ended up getting one for him.
Yeah, he wasn't into running zombies, and he wasn't into zombies eating brains. It just didn't make any sense to him. Why would zombies go through the thick skull when they have all these easier things to eat?
Correct. And I mean, that was really first done with Return of the Living Dead, which was Russo, who had worked with him on Night. And they tried a little explanation there with brains to help them not go through the pain of. And I love Return of the Living Dead. It's got its own little place in my heart. But it's, I'm a fan of the entire genre. I try to watch all of them. I like some of the running ones, but you know, you saw what happened with World War Z when it got adapted to a film. It
Yeah.
completely, the only thing it had in common with the book was the title, and it was an all-right action movie. I can't complain about it in that regard, but there is something special here, not just in the book, but I was reading it, and you were so vivid in your detail. I could see it popping up on my screen. And
Yeah.
film and shows are my first medium for art. I'm a film buff. I mean, this podcast is based in movies and music. And all I could see is how vividly you painted it. And I'm like, this is going to be on my screen somewhere in the near future.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's certainly possible, and but it was certainly also important to make sure it existed fully as a book.
Yeah.
So that it, I mean, that's part of why you wrote it, is
For
frustrations with
sure.
the movie business.
Yeah.
He had
He never
always
got to see his full vision.
He never got to see his full vision. He did have a yearning to do something on a massive scope that never quite happened, and a lot of those frustrations came into this book. So in a way, it's bit. If this did turn into something big, film or TV type of program, there's a certain bittersweetness to it, definitely, because he would have never been given the that kind of that size of a treasure chest to
No,
work
I
with
mean,
on
what
film.
was the largest budget he got at any point was for Land of the Dead, I believe.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, and when you look at that, and even then, it was originally supposed to be Dead Reckoning, and it was supposed to be on a bigger scale. And Land
Yeah.
might be his, I mean, Survival is definitely underrated, but Land, I feel like, doesn't get talked enough about in his like grand scope of things. And
Yeah.
to think where this could go, and again, as you said, the amount of if Del Toro does it, the way you tied in the multiple stories, it almost it is nonlinear in some ways, the way things overlap and then come to a head. The first person I thought of was Mike Flanagan, who might be the best in horror right now between Doctor Sleep and Oculus and Haunting of Hill House. But there could be a great young director out there that reads this the same way I am and saying, I got to turn this into something. And you could see your novel do the best justice done to it possible. But for now, the fans out there, anyone that's a fan of Romero, zombies, or anything, I can't stress enough just how much you got to pick up this book. It's you had to at some point. I'm sure, just being a fan. At what was there a point where you were questioning if you were doing Romero's legacy justice, like almost questioning yourself, like most artists do?
Yeah, but my defense mode in situations like that is to kind of just tell myself that I've got it, and doubt, and let the doubt and the questioning push that off for as long as I can. You have to, for me, writing does involve pumping myself up a bit and making myself believe that in this case that I'm the right guy for this. I've got this. I've been studying for this, and it's they're in the dark hours of the night, it all kind of falls apart. But it's important to me to get a head of steam going before any massive project. So yeah, there were doubts, but there was just I had a lot to say about Romero, and I thought I had a lot to add to it. And more than anything, I just wanted to pay him back. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. And I wanted to send him off in grandest style as possible.
You really did. And in your co-author's note at the end, you told the story about when you got to meet him. Is that as starstruck as you've been meeting someone?
Well, it's interesting. I don't get starstruck.
Okay.
I don't know what that gene is that I'm missing, but it's something that's never really happened to me. But I was so pleased to meet him, though. But I am very cognizant of, especially in that meeting, which was purely social.
Sure.
That the meeting, it was congenial and it was fun, but it was not a meeting he was going to remember a few days later. Like those kind of things, you have to realize that it means something to you, and that's probably it. It's not going to mean much to him. So you just try to be respectful and kind, and it scratches a sort of itch in your head, like is this guy, going to be as sweet as I hope he is. And he was, and then that was sort of it. And it was sort of just a gentle sort of passing of, all right, I got to meet my hero.
I regret that the one opportunity I had to meet him, I had to bail at the last minute, and I couldn't go. And it was like a year later when he passed, and you told the story about when you heard he passed, and you were kind of like shook by it. And I remember I was coming back from a vacation in the car, and I was just like, whoa, like I was not expecting this. And because it was, one of the pillars of my childhood, one of my childhood heroes that I probably dedicated as much time. There's two things I've dedicated way too many hours to in my life. It's Romero and zombies in general and Star Wars. And this was kind of like one of the last like pillars of my childhood leaving. And I thought you, beyond the story, your co-authors did great justice to show just how important this was to you, and not just for you, but for his fans and for him and his wife and his family. And man, you hit a home run. You hit a grand slam out of the park. The bottom of the ninth, it was done.
Well, I mean, when I hear that, it just makes me feel very, very good and humbled. And like there's every time I hear that, a little piece of the weight in my back falls off. And that's a good thing, because I did feel a ton of responsibility. And it was one of the most difficult things was balancing the idea of being very, very loyal to the words that he had written, because they were finite, but also knowing that he wouldn't have wanted me to play it safe either.
Yeah, and you took risks, which is important.
So I had the one thing that helped in that was that he had after he gathered all the material, his contribution wasn't contained to the beginning of the book. It was spread throughout.
Yeah.
And so that helped me to always have to I couldn't go too far afield. I could go crazy a little bit, but I had to hit the next point on his.
You had launching points to go off of rather than steering too far from the path.
Yeah, so I always had to come back to Romero in a way, and that I think helped.
All right, fantastic. So I want to ask you a couple last questions before we let you go. And again, this is Daniel Kraus, author, co-author with George A. Romero of the new novel, The Living Dead. So the first one I'm going to ask is your favorite Romero film.
Well, I almost have to, and feel like I should remove Night of the Living Dead from that, because Night of the Living Dead to me is like an album that I've heard a million times. It's just like
absolutely.
It's just like part of me.
Ingrained.
I can't judge it in any kind of way. It's too packed into my DNA and my emotional state. Beyond that, I would probably say. And I would love to say one of his non-zombie films, because in general, I just love his non-zombie films. But the truth
is, The Crazies is brilliant. I mean, it's kind of The Crazies, dark half, fantastic.
Martin's
fantastic.
Love them. Honestly, my answer is probably Day of the Dead.
I'm gonna go the same route.
Yeah, it's a movie that that's almost the only movie that would rival would be Night of the Living Dead, as far as I just never get sick of it.
It's one that I've grown to love more and more as I've gotten older, because when I was younger, I don't think I could appreciate just how well made it was. I love the kills at the end, and as I've gotten older, I've told my friends Captain Rhodes is one of my most hateable movie characters of all time. It's just incredibly well done.
Well, for whatever,
that was gonna be my next question. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, for whatever reason, I saw Night of the Living Dead very young, and then watched that for many years. And then I actually saw Day of the Dead before I saw Dawn. So Day was more formative to me than Dawn, and I've always been a sucker for limited characters, limited space, and of course you could say that for Night and Dawn too. Sure. There were limited characters, limited space.
This was much more claustrophobic because. You weren't seeing anyone else. I mean, in Dawn, you had ideas that it was a more open space. In Night, you knew there were things going on outside that maybe this is the beginning of it. You saw a TV and the news, and Day, it's just they're isolated.
I think of his 6 zombie films, it's the bleakest. And from a young age, I've always been attracted to those kind of stories the most.
Agreed. So the next question was, what's your favorite non-Romero zombie film?
Oh, well, I'd probably say Creepshow. Again, that's kind of it's kind of an easy answer, but I'm kind of obsessed with Creepshow. That was another one of those movies that I saw as a kid without realizing it was a George Romero movie. Catching bits of it on my friend's HBO and just like being really taken by it. I would also, I mean, I really, really love Martin, and I really love Season of the Witch, which George didn't particularly like, but I think is really fantastic.
That's an incredibly underrated film. I actually just downloaded that the other day to watch it again.
Yeah, it's really good.
So this is not Romero related, but zombie related. Your favorite non-Romero zombie film?
Well, unlike you, I'm not a omnivorous zombie lover.
Okay.
I like them as much as the next kind of general moviegoer.
Purist.
But I don't I don't like seek them out.
Sure. I do
specifically.
Okay.
But the 6 Romero zombie movies to me are my favorite 6 zombie movies. I just find them they're just at a different level for me on various planes. But it's a good question. I love Zombie,
Zombie's fantastic. I mean, most people just know the shark scene. That's really all that they know.
Yeah, like that one's so good. There's a really obscure one that I bet maybe you have seen called iZombie.
iZombie's great.
Which is really underseen and isn't perfect, but it's got something that always I've seen it a few times and it always gets to me in a weird kind of way. So I guess I'll stick with those two. But again, I'm not anti-zombie. Clearly,
of course, I'm a huge fan of Peter Jackson's Dead Alive or Brain Dead.
Yeah,
one
that's
of my
fun.
most fun movies there is.
Yeah, you can't not like that one.
All right. So the last question we ask all our guests this question because we're based in movies and TV and albums specifically. Your favorite movie of all time? Period.
Well, again, the real answer is Night of the Living Dead.
Night of the Living Dead. You can't go wrong with that. That's a totally safe answer, and it might be my answer 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, I mean that. I could remove that, come up with a different answer, but the real answer is Night of the Living Dead.
That's the right answer then. And your favorite album or favorite album by your favorite band?
Ooh, favorite album. I wasn't expecting this.
My co-host is the music guy. I'm the movie guy. So I have to ask.
At least for the last 10 years, my favorite album is an album by the unfortunately deceased Johan Johansson.
Okay.
He made this album called The Miners' Hymns, which is it's a soundtrack to a documentary.
Okay.
I guess you would say. And I listen to music constantly as I write, and I've probably depended on that album more when writing important scenes than any other. So that album has a special place in my heart.
Awesome. I'm actually going to check that out. So again, this is Daniel Kraus, author of the new novel, The Living Dead. Where can anyone get the book?
You can get it anywhere. It's
anywhere.
Any store you've got. I will say that if you want it autographed and personalized, the only place to get that from is a bookstore in Chicago called Mad Street Books.
Mad Street Books. All right. Well, Daniel, I really appreciate you taking some time with us. I'm probably going to end up lending this book to one of my friends and spread the love. I want everyone to get out there and get this. If you don't have it, buy it. I'm only lending it to one friend, so more people buy it. And I'm really excited to see what you do next and see where this novel goes.
Thank you so much.
All right, man. You have a great day. Thanks for joining us, man.
All right. Take care.